we have rumors that I don't even know if it's rumors or just a report in general, but the report is that there is going to be a new Star Wars trilogy, and it's going to be episodes 10, 11, and 12. Kevin is not here today, as you can see. He texted me today saying that he had lost his voice, which is an unfortunate time to lose your voice when there is quite a bit of Star Wars stuff to talk about. But our original topic for this week's episode was going to be the Rey trilogy. So that was going to be the plan. And we'll talk about that next week. Or not the Rey trilogy, but the Rey movie. That was going to be the plan. But when there is news like this, I think we kind of have to shift. So we'll talk the Rey movie next week. But we're going to talk the reports on this sequel trilogy. I don't know what a sequel to a sequel is, but that's what we're going to talk about today. Also, yes, Christmas tree is now up. It's November. You know how most people do it. We're skipping right past Thanksgiving and going to Christmas. So for like the next 6 or 7 of these episodes, Christmas tree will be here. But let's hop in here. I've got my iPad with the news here. And let's just kind of read through this report from Deadline. So credits to Deadline. The guy who's writing this is Mike Fleming Jr. I don't know how reputable this source is, to be honest with you, but it is certainly interesting nonetheless. But the main report, which you've probably already heard about at this point, is Simon Kinberg is going to be doing a Star Wars trilogy that is actually a part of the Skywalker saga. So not some random Star Wars story that's out in this universe, but an episodic trilogy, 10, 11, and 12. So just first initial thoughts that I had when I read this. One, no, please don't do this, right? Like we're already through 9 with the Skywalker saga. Let's just kind of cut our losses, stop here at 9, and any other Star Wars stuff can just be its own thing, right? Like do its own story. So my initial thoughts on this are, let's not actually make this be 10, 11, and 12. I think we can leave that. We can have stories like you've seen The Mandalorian, Ahsoka, with Kenobi, Book of Boba Fett. You can go on and on. Andor's great. Do we need episodic Star Wars? That's the question at this point. In my opinion, that answer is no. We don't need it. But there are some positives in this as well. I think there's actually a lot of positives in this when you kind of take a big picture look at what this report is saying. And it's very different than how they went about the sequel trilogy. So I think that's a lot of the positives there. But just initial thoughts on this was, why would we do this? Why are we doing a 10, 11, and 12? Especially with like how controversial 7, 8, and 9 turned out to be. Again, there's parts of all those movies that I like. I really like episode 7. But then 8 I like less than 7, and 9 I like less than 8, which I like less than 7. So, people have their complaints about the sequels. I think that's the nicest way to put this. So, gonna be doing a 10 and 11 and 12 according to this report. And like in the same sentence, it says that this Simon Kinberg is going to be making this trilogy with Kathleen Kennedy at the helm. So again, that's kind of up in the air on whether that's a good thing or not, right? So Kathleen Kennedy is kind of a hot button topic for Star Wars fans. I don't know. I don't know what I think about that. Obviously, she's very successful. I haven't liked everything that's happened with Star Wars that she has overseen, but also I haven't hated it all either. There's been some great stuff. So again, kind of a mixed bag there for me. But 10, 11, and 12, Simon Kinberg with Kathleen Kennedy at the helm of Lucasfilm. That's the report. Now, this article does kind of say that some insiders, Star Wars insiders, if that's even a thing at this point, like things are pretty tight-lipped there, but says that Star Wars insiders are disputing this and that this Simon Kinberg is going to have a trilogy, but it's not going to be episodic. It will be its own thing, kind of set apart from 1 through 9, and it will be telling stories around the time frame of other movies that are taking place, right? Like we got the Rey movie and things like that. But it's just going to be its own trilogy, which again, kind of what I would prefer from this. But Disney and Lucasfilm are not going to comment on it, right? Everyone's reaching out for comments. They're not going to hear anything from Disney until Disney wants you to hear about it. So when would you hear anything from Disney on this? Star Wars Celebration in Japan, spring 2025. That's when you would hear something about this, not with some news outlet reaching out to Lucasfilm. They're not going to have this story broke by a news outlet and reporting. They will be having their cake and eating it too when this happens. But let's take a look at Simon Kinberg, right? This is one of the positives. Actually, a few parts of this are the positives from this report, in my opinion. So, first of all, he's not new to Star Wars. He worked with Dave Filoni on Star Wars Rebels. Now, Rebels, I think, is at this current point the best Star Wars series story, start to finish. Okay, so not that it's better than The Mandalorian or better than Andor or Ahsoka or whatever, but just its story from start to finish is the best story. And it's easier to say that because we've seen how the story actually ends. So probably not even fair to compare it to these live action shows that the story is not finished yet, but that's where we're at currently. I think the story of Rebels is great, and this guy who's going to be having this trilogy knows a lot about Star Wars because he worked with Star Wars Rebels. I didn't realize this either, but he was also a consultant for The Force Awakens with J.J. Abrams. So I think that's pretty awesome. The Force Awakens, I mean, looking at it on its own, it was really safe with a lot of the stuff it did, right? Like there wasn't just a ton of groundbreaking new things in The Force Awakens. It took a lot of the tones of the original trilogy. Obviously, you've got Han, Luke, and Leia in the film. It played it safe, right? Ripped off the Death Star again. You've got Han Solo kind of making the Obi-Wan Kenobi sacrifice there at the end. You've got the bad guy in a mask. I mean, again, you know The Force Awakens. It kind of pulls a lot out of A New Hope, and that's what they do in the movie. And the movie made like $1 billion. It was a safe play. Everyone was pretty hyped up about Star Wars after it. So this guy also consulted on The Force Awakens. I think that's a positive thing, right? I mean, as far as the sequel trilogy goes, a lot of people think pretty well about The Force Awakens. Now, another good thing about this report, with regardless of who the writer or director is going to be, is that they're giving the person a trilogy. This is not like, okay, we are going to have J.J. Abrams do it. Then we are going to pass it off to Rian Johnson, and he gets to do his own story. And then Rian Johnson is going to pass it off to Colin Trevorrow, but then he's going to get fired, so he's going to pass it off to J.J. Abrams. And we're going to have this like very disjointed sequel trilogy, which is what we ultimately ended up getting with 7, 8, and 9, unfortunately. And that's probably, I know that's my biggest complaint. I think it's a lot of people's biggest complaints, is just how disjointed the sequel trilogy was. It was a director relay, a storytelling relay race where nothing is continuous throughout all three movies. There was not a big picture. I don't know how you spend $4 billion on an intellectual property and don't have a plan for what to do with it other than make money, which they certainly have done. So they have accomplished goal number one. But I don't understand how you take that much money with such a large IP and you say, we're just going to kind of wing it on this trilogy that continues the 6 greatest storytelling movies, in that format, in my opinion, of all time. So kind of some careless planning, if you can even call it planning, with the sequel trilogy. But here, it appears we have a new trilogy with one guy over all three movies. Now, that would seem to lend to you thinking, okay, they have a plan for this. That is the best news you would ever hear about anything with Star Wars stuff going forward, is there is a good plan about it. So I'm really pretty high on that aspect. Like, this guy knows his Star Wars. He's been involved with Star Wars. He's involved with Dave Filoni, which for me, that's a good thing. I really like Dave Filoni's storytelling in Rebels, Ahsoka, love Ahsoka, Clone Wars. So a lot of positives there from this report outside of just the shock value of like, hey, we're going to do episodes 10, 11, and 12. Big shock value. But when you dig into it, there's some positives to look at in there as well. So kind of moving past that, let's take a look at what else he's done. So again, I am not like an avid movie goer. I really like Star Wars. I like the stuff I like. I'll watch the Harry Potter, Hunger Games, things like that. Like, I'm not the person who knows all the directors and actors and things from every movie. That's just not who I am. But I really enjoy Star Wars. So, kind of looking at the other stuff that Simon Kinberg has done. He spent a decade on the X-Men films, and he was part of Logan. And now Kevin can touch on this maybe a little bit when he returns next week. He's seen a lot of this stuff, I'm pretty sure. But Logan, I want to say, was like the best X-Men thing that had ever happened when it came out. I do remember a lot of people liking that. Not really much negative going on with the Logan spinoff. So not bad there. I think that's a positive thing. A lot of people have a lot of nice things to say about the X-Men projects that he worked on. Also, the first two Deadpool movies. Now, again, I have not seen either one of those, but have a lot of friends that really enjoy Deadpool. It seems to me that there is a lot of positivity around that franchise, and so he's had his hands involved with that as well. He's been involved with The Martian, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Sherlock Holmes franchise. I mean, you've got a lot of good stuff here. So, hey, seems good to me. They're hiring a very qualified, if true, they're hiring a very qualified director producing all these films that have done pretty well. I don't know a lot of negatives out of these. So you bring that into Star Wars, you give the guy a trilogy. It appears that he would have the blessing of continuing the Skywalker story, which interesting because none of them are alive anymore, but going to continue this story of the Skywalker saga, if true. If not true, and he's just doing his own trilogy, still, it's a positive, I think, with his resume, with the fact that he's going to get to do it across all three films. Those are all great things. So, first of all, that's the report that's out there, rumor, if you will. Apparently seems to be reputable. I don't know. I'll believe it when I see it. But let's kind of shift this topic and let's go from the report to maybe the wish list predictions, things that I would like to see out of a Star Wars trilogy. One, I will say, out of a Star Wars trilogy that continues the episodic titles. So 1 through 9. So what would I like to see out of an episode 10, 11, and 12 that specifically are following up from the 9 movies we have? I think, first of all, if the Rey movie is going to happen, that's some looks kind of dicey, but Daisy Ridley, she insists that things are going okay, things are exciting there. So I'll take her word for it. She is Rey. She would know more than I would. But I think first, if this movie is going to be 10, 11, and 12, I think the Rey movie has to be kind of a soft launch for that. So I think the Rey movie almost plays like a Rogue One, if you will, right? So Rogue One is not part of episodes 1 through 9. Fits into that timeline, though. It's very important to episodes 1 through 9, especially it's important to the original trilogy. So, does it play the Rogue One role? It is part of the story, but it's a standalone. So I think the Rey movie has to happen if it's going to happen first. Then you can move into a 10, 11, and 12. Like the Rey movie lays the foundation for where the Skywalker saga, if you will, continues moving forward. So you're going to have to, if you're saying it's a Skywalker saga, love it, hate it, indifferent about it. Rey, Rey is the last Skywalker, unless you're resurrecting Ben Solo from the dead, which it's like science fiction, fantasy, space opera stuff. You could do whatever you wanted within it. It's not like it's the real world, but I don't think we're going to be doing that. I think that's a slippery slope if you're going down that path. But hey, Adam Driver's a great actor. He's my favorite character. Kylo Ren is in the sequel trilogy, so I wouldn't complain, I guess, if they brought him back. But it would appear that this story is going to have to follow Rey Skywalker more so than any of the other Skywalkers because she's the only one left. Now, say they do this, I would assume that this Rey movie kind of sets up her Jedi Order, or it sets the foundation of how is she going to make it happen? Because it's supposed to be 15 years after the Rise of Skywalker. So how is that going to play out if she has established it? It will be interesting to see what conflict they have out of it. Something has to challenge this Jedi Order. You assume that the Sith have ended with Palpatine. That is certainly the implication. So I think you'd be dealing with some kind of dark side users that aren't necessarily a Sith. You could be kind of dealing with crime syndicates. Maybe I think that was George Lucas's idea in the original sequel trilogy that he had planned. So I think you would have to come up with some kind of antagonist, some kind of villain for Rey's Jedi Order to have. Maybe they go back to I don't want to say the well, but they go back to the idea that seems to work for Star Wars in that someone has a falling out from this Jedi Order. You have Anakin Skywalker falls in the prequels, causes all this destruction. You have the sequel trilogy. You have Kylo Ren falling from Luke's Jedi Order. So maybe they kind of go back to the well on that story, and Rey has got this Jedi Order, and somebody turns bad and destroys the Order, challenges the Order, something along those lines. I think that would probably be the only direction for this film to go if you don't go crime syndicate, because who else is going to challenge the Jedi other than dark force users or like gangs and criminals? So I think that's the direction it would probably have to take a turn towards. Now, just thought of this here. I think it would be super interesting if they had John Boyega come back as Finn, force sensitive Finn, right? They finally set that up in episode 9 when they abandoned it in 8. And what if he comes back and then he falls to the dark side? So you've got like a Finn versus Rey thing going there. What if Rey somehow falls to the dark side? That would be kind of a complex, interesting story there. But I think it would carry a lot more weight if it's a character that we're familiar with falling versus just some random new character. Now, they could do that and do the character very well, but man, if we hop right in and Finn is the one that goes bad, and then he's like, he wouldn't be a Sith, say he just falls from the Jedi, and he's not even like bound by the Sith rules. So he takes people with him and they all turn bad. And then instead of like a rule of 2, you've just got a whole lot of bad guys fighting this new Jedi Order. I think there would be a lot of cool action there. You would obviously have more storytelling for Finn. You could make his character go much deeper than they allowed it to go in the sequel trilogy. That's a complaint of mine. It's a complaint of many people's, John Boyega included. He wasn't super happy with that. But you could really take a deep dive on him. And you would have to look this up and double check me on it. But I think he said he's going to be at Star Wars Celebration in like a recent interview or something like that. So, not sure if they're just going to be doing like a 10-year celebration of The Force Awakens there and he's going to be there, or he's there for an announcement of this trilogy and Daisy Ridley probably would be there and they would throw some information out about that. I think that would be pretty cool. I think a lot of people would get excited about it. It's kind of crazy to think that it's been 10 years almost since The Force Awakens. 2025 will have been 10 years. So sometimes time heals a lot of wounds. And so it's been a while since we've seen this stuff. And so maybe that time would make us grow fonder to seeing these stories again. So that is one possibility there, right? So you have Rey's Jedi Order, just continuing that story. And really, that would kind of make sense if you wanted to tie it into the Skywalker saga, because you could have Luke's Force Ghost helping her. You could have Anakin Skywalker's Force Ghost. Hayden Christensen is obviously open to returning as a Force Ghost. You could have Obi-Wan Kenobi's Force Ghost. You could have Princess Leia. They can CGI that in there and deep fake and all that stuff. Maybe you could get Liam Neeson to come and do Qui-Gon Jinn. I don't know. Yoda's a puppet. So, like, you could definitely make all of that work. You've got prequel, original trilogy, sequel trilogy characters kind of rounding up this story. It is, I guess you technically still have a Palpatine there. I was going to say it is kind of strange to have, at this point, Star Wars movies without knowing that a Palpatine is the bad guy, but Rey is a Palpatine. So I suppose you got all your boxes checked. She's a Skywalker. She's a Palpatine. What can't she do? But yeah, you would have everything there you needed. And how ironic would it be that in episode 1 we start this story of a Palpatine destroying a Jedi Order, and this whole story, if they ever decide that 12 is truly enough, kind of wraps up with a Palpatine reestablishing a Jedi Order under the moniker of Skywalker. Kind of like poetry, right? It rhymes. So I think that could be interesting if done well. And apparently, like we said, Simon Kinberg, he seems to kind of know his stuff just looking at his resume on how to make good movies, and he's familiar with Star Wars. So don't really have any reason to think that he would just completely, totally botch this. So I think that's one cool possibility. Now, probably my ultimate preference would be, hey, pull this away from 1 through 9, give someone a trilogy, but let it be a Star Wars story set some period of time, either way in the future or way in the past, right? So you get far enough away from the Anakin Skywalker story. You get far enough away from the George Lucas Star Wars, from the sequel trilogy, and you just give someone a sandbox to play in. So you give someone the reins to a story set in universe. You get your Jedi, you get your bad guys. You could go away from Force users, but why would you do that when you can have lightsabers on screen? So I think you could give someone a story that's so far removed from what we already know that there's not like all these eggshells you have to walk on. You don't have to dodge, oh, well, if you do this, it retcons this. And if you do this, it messes up that story. And so it seems like it would be a very safe play. If I were like writing these movies, I would want to be so far removed from any Skywalker story, just because of how Star Wars fans can be very passionate about Star Wars, to say the least. So I think if you take this story away and you set it up, maybe it could even be in a different galaxy at this point, right? Like we've seen Ahsoka in a different galaxy, so maybe give them a story out in Peridia or something like that, or follow like a Mortis type story. What if we had that? What if we had a Mortis trilogy, or a World Between Worlds trilogy, or an Ahsoka trilogy, or something like that, like out in a galaxy that doesn't impact the current galaxy that Star Wars takes place in? That would be interesting, non-confrontational, certainly a safe play. So that's one idea. And then when you get into the actual story aspect of it, possibilities are endless. Obviously, you want it to feel like Star Wars, but you have good guys who face some sort of a challenge, an uphill climb. You've got the rebels or the resistance. There has to be that aspect of it, the David and Goliath play, if you will. And then you're going to have this great theme of hope, which Star Wars always does so well. Even in the sequel trilogy, they keep that aspect of hope there, which really is at its core what Star Wars is. So I think that's a lot more vague of what would you like to see? You can see anything if you get away from this Skywalker story. You're only constrained when you stay in the Skywalker story. If you go outside of it, there's anything that you could do, really, especially if you get far enough removed from any of these stories. So I think that would probably be my preference just because I feel like it's safest. I would rather them not take like a big risk. And I mean, let's just say it. If you love the sequel trilogy, that's great. But let's say you do 10 through 12 and you've got a 7 through 12 that is not George Lucas Star Wars, and you have a 1 through 6 that is. And let's say the latter 6 just don't perform very well. What if 10, 11, and 12 are just horrible? And then there's this constant like divide between the two, yet they still have to be one cohesive story. And I just honestly am not interested in any more division in the Star Wars fandom. So I lean towards the safe side of just give someone their own story. I think that would be a great way to go about it. I think these movies are going to make a ton of money anyways, which honestly, that's really all they care about. That's all they're supposed to care about, right? They're in the business of making money. So I think regardless of what they did, it would make money. But if you make the safe play and you know that like, well, this isn't going to ruin what we already have, I think it will make a lot more money at first, regardless of whatever the story ends up being, right? The box office will be big just for the excitement at first. And then if there's not blowback or anything, that money keeps growing. So I do think that's where I lean towards. But if you do continue it and go 10, 11, and 12, and it's well written and it follows Rey and it keeps like the theme of 1 through 9 at its current point, it continues that story, and maybe we don't end up going to like 13, 14, 15 or whatever it would end up being, I think that would be pretty good. So that's a lot there. Let me know what you think about the possibility of an episode 10, 11, and 12. Leave that in the comments. And then also next week, we're still talking the Rey movie. That's what we're going to do. So let me know what you think about that Rey movie as well, and we will feature some of those comments in next week's episode. Otherwise, thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.